Thank you so much for having me speak to your class. First and foremost, before we even begin anything, before I begin even introducing myself, I want you to feel grounded and I want you to get in touch with you. So if you'll join me in taking 3 deep breaths, this is a mindfulness technique that I've learned working with children and families that I've started implementing. It's called 4-7-8 breathing. And what 4-7-8 breathing means is that we take 4 seconds to inhale our breath, we hold our breath for 7 seconds, and then we release it for 8 seconds. And as we inhale and exhale, if you'd like, you can put one hand over your chest and one hand over your abdomen. And when you're inhaling, you focus on your abdomen expanding. And as your abdomen expands, you're going to learn how to focus and hold the air in there until you're ready to release it and blow it out gently, either through your lips, like blowing through a straw, or out your nose again. That's up to you. So on the count of 3, we are going to do 3 of these deep breaths. 1, 2, 3. And now we hold it for 7 seconds. And now we release for 8 seconds. And again, inhale. And release. One more time. Inhale. And release. As I speak to you today, please be aware of your breathing. Please be aware of what you need. If you need to go and get water, do it. I will begin with an introduction of myself and then talk more specifically about building communities where there may not be as much support for theories and practices of family support. Jerry Jeremiah is my pen name and my Facebook name, so be free to add me on Facebook or follow my Facebook page. That goes under Jerry Jeremiah. And I come to speak with all of you today, not just as a Ryerson alumni, class of 2008, but as a life coach, as a children's author. I have written and self-published my own children's book about feelings, which I will talk a little bit about. But mainly as someone working in the global pandemic today, supporting children and families. My goal today, no matter what field you aspire a career in, and no matter where you are in your academic journey, that you can take away 2 things from our talk today. Firstly, I want you to become compelled in the work that you choose to do. Whether you decide to stay in a field that relates to practices and family support or not, I want you to wake up in the mornings compelled doing what you choose to do. That is so important. And that in your being, you have the desire, in your essence, to live better, to work harder, and to achieve more. And that you are compelled to follow your heart and be empowered with something that inspires you today. Today. Don't wait for tomorrow. If you need to do something for yourself, oh, I need to lose those 10 pounds. Oh, I want to find a new course. Oh, I need to connect with this friend. Don't wait till tomorrow. Find that essence that drives you and do it today, because there's no time like the present. The second thing I want you to be filled with, and that's something that we talk a lot about in life coaching, is curiosity. I want you to leave me today with a childlike curiosity in your well-being and on your mind. Being curious more just means learning more. And it means creating conversations and discussions that normally otherwise wouldn't have happened. And it means creating these conversations and discussions that need to happen. They need to happen not just globally, not just locally, but in our own families, in our own homes, in our own selves, with ourselves, and each other. A little bit about myself. I, as you know, am a self-published children's author. The very concept of my book about feelings was actually inspired in a course that I took about social emotional intelligence development in young children. As a self-published author, I learned that libraries will not put your book into catalog. They will not share your books for families and children to borrow and read. I also learned that as a self-published author, that a lot of well-known organizations will not even accept your book, even if you have hundreds of them, for their families, for their participants or community members to take home. Luckily, I have found a way to share my books with the families in early on centers here in Ontario and throughout the GTA. Luckily, I've been able to have my books distributed at the Children's Book Bank to be shared with families during this time. Funnily enough, they were one of the first organizations to say no to me. And how I got around that was through completions, through connections, through having that desire on my mind of sharing my books with families and sharing that with professionals I worked with. And lo and behold, one of the professionals I worked with happened to have just gotten a job at the Children's Book Bank, and bam. And then they're like, you know what? We'll come over this weekend, pick up 400 copies. We'll talk to the director. And over the pandemic, I think it was in March and April, they were able to put around 350 to 400 copies of my children's book to be distributed contactlessly with families. And I think this was happening Wednesdays once a week when families would come, pick up a little package from the book bank, and have the books they can read as a way of giving them resources and things that they might not have access to because of the pandemic and because of lockdown. I'm very happy to have done that kind of work. I am also a Kids Coaching Connection graduate. I took and graduated this course in 2016. I remember the year and the days leading up to graduation very specifically, because about 2 weeks before I was about to graduate in May, I had received an image text message from my mother. And it was sent to her nearest and dearest friends and family. And I was wondering, oh gosh, is this another forward that mothers send when they find something they want to send and they just send it to their network? No, it was something personal. And it was a picture text message. The picture was of a letter from Sunnybrook Hospital stating that my mother had stage 4 oral cancer and that she had only months to live. I was given the skills just in time to coach myself through my mother's death during the last 6 months of her life. Anyone who has met me prior to becoming a coach, anyone who still knew me as a student, I was a ball full of energy, but very easily flustered. I was passionate and engaging and spoke up, but was easily confused and very disorganized. And I'm actually surprised at the amount of change that has happened and at the professional that I've become. But it was only through admitting and getting help and finding support for those things that I needed that has helped me to become the professional that I am today. And without that self-awareness, and once again, without that curiosity inside, I wasn't able to address issues that I had in myself. Issues with communication, issues as an individual coming from a culture who I had to stay in the closet, but now working very proudly as a gay man in an LGBTQ organization, learning about human rights movement, learning about adapting and changing to the needs of marginalized and the intersections of our communities and people that may be underrepresented or underserved. I also was able to lecture for about 7 years at different business colleges about the ECA program. I was a college instructor for that. And I've also spoken at Seneca College and at other engagements at Ryerson University and have worked very closely with the ECE department in participating in their career fair. And I even had one time in 2007, Ryerson students who have completed 1 semester's worth of placement work with me in all the endeavors that I did. At the time, these were 2 fashion students from the fashion program working with me on a project that I did for the Inside Out Digital Youth Media and Film Festival that they were having that year. If you look closely, you will also see that I am one of the Asian nerds at the cafeteria table in Mean Girls, that I am also a zombie from the movie Dawn of the Dead, that I was also a background dancer for a TV series called Queer as Folk and also Degrassi The Next Generation. Both, I think, were in season 5, as I was also a television and movie extra for many years. Out of all these hats I wear, and out of all the roles that I play, I am most of all an innovator. I am an innovator of ideas and the work behind building supports and creating opportunities that children and families need today. This is something that I am very passionate about. In fact, in all my other roles and successes, it has probably been the one philosophy and one mission that I hold on to the most. Whether I was waiting for the next scene to come up for us to go on set to shoot as a movie extra, or whether I was preparing my lecture notes to lecture at these colleges that I worked at the time. Trying to build communities and opportunities of engagement for families and children to be involved, for them to have an avenue and a medium to speak, for them to be integrated, has always been a passion of mine. And I hold it very close to my heart in everything that I do. From being an active listener to providing programs and delivering services on a lot of virtual and online platforms that I'm still learning about today. 9 months into the pandemic, I'm still learning things about YouTube, about Facebook, about Eventbrite, about Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I see a lot of motivational speakers and a lot of educators use those platforms to speak and reach to people. I'm inspired, I'm compelled, but I'm also busy. So it takes a lot of time to kind of figure out what's the most important thing that I want to do today. But I want you to know that today, this time here, this is my main event. Speaking to all of you today is what's most important to me. And each day or each week, finding what's most important to you and speaking out about that. You know, you may be connecting with families or an organization with one task, and your heart and your enthusiasm and your passion might be to bring up awareness and to bring up ideas of inclusion about something else. Don't filter yourself. Build the compelling passion in yourself to speak up, because if and only when you do, you will realize that there might be someone at the table saying, I never thought of that. Or, what a great idea, thinking outside the box. If there's any messages that are coming through you want to raise your hand up to contribute and speak, please honor yourself and do that. Don't let yourself forget, because we never know what the universe is giving to us at any moment. You could be the only one with that fresh idea that no one else would have thought of, heard of, or even have paid attention to if you did not bring it to the table. So I invite all of you to honor this connection, that if you do need to speak up or have ideas, please do so. And carry that energy with you, so that no matter where you go in life, whether it's at the dinner table with your family tonight, or whether it's at an online virtual meeting with an organization you do part-time work for, or whether it's on a committee that you're serving, if there's an idea or even just a thought that you have, don't filter yourself. Just say it. At the end of that thought or that program or that day, you have no regrets. You don't go to bed thinking, oh, I should have said something to so-and-so. Because the moment you thought of it, you've honored yourself by making the time and space to say what you needed to say what's on your mind and your heart, right then, right there. At the end of the day, the challenge we face about building communities in areas with not much or not many supports, as a professional, to become compelled by this challenge in these changing times and start to be curious about new ways to develop relationships with families by connecting and learning about new technologies, new social media platforms, and invite myself to be once again a part of these families and these children's and these community members' lives. Because of lockdown and service restriction enforced by the city, our immediate challenge as family support professionals was to learn about the virtual world and develop programs and policies to use to begin to build and engage communities. So I remember my last day of work, my two last days of work. Friday, March 13th, and it was Friday the 13th, however you want to look at it. And I was running program, and that day I had already had about a month and a half. I was watching YouTube and following for about 6 weeks now this couple, and they were on a cruise ship, and the cruise ship just had been infected with COVID-19, and this was only on the cruise ship. It was only in specific areas of the world at that time. It hadn't come to us. And I was following this couple. They were talking about how they were stuck in their cabins, and they gave this day by day kind of live feed. So every night after work, I would go hunker down, I'd get all cozied up, and I would watch this couple's live feed talk about how COVID was affecting their life on the ship. Slowly, it wasn't until the first or second week of March did I start hearing that word around the workplace. And in thinking, okay, well, we've got health measures to protect us against that. We've got policies in place to help us continue work with families. Was I wrong? Was I wrong about the ideas about that? We had no idea about what was coming or what was ahead of us. My very last day of the children's program on March 13th, we had actually just successfully organized the collaboration with the Hebrew Academy to do an open market. I don't even know if we'll get to do open markets in the future. But what that entailed was having lightly and gently used books and toys and games and clothes that other families donated. And that day we got to display for all our participants in a separate room. We hung up the coats and the jackets and the clothes. We displayed the books and the toys and the games. And we allowed families to come in during our program time, and they got to do some shopping. We weren't there to judge who was there to use those resources. We were there to say, is this something you're interested in? Here are some plastic bags. Help yourself. What size of clothes do you need? What kind of clothing were you interested in? And so in conjunction with running my children's program that day, which I'm working with the Early On, a program that ran between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., and we had music circle time, we had free play time, we had snack time. And I remember on that day, as the program was going through its flow and its scheduled course, from the free time to making announcements at snack, I remember getting a phone call saying, okay, well, after snack time, we're going to have to tell families goodbye and that we're closing. And I didn't think that that was such a big deal. I thought, okay, well, some schools are closing for March break. Maybe it'll be a few weeks. Well, as the program was nearing, we had snack as a group together. We did music circle together. We sang together one last time in that indoor space. We got to do physical activities together. And between 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. that day, I was saying goodbye to different families, saying, okay, this is what I was told, this is what I have permission to share with you, and the details of what I could share with families, saying, this is the last day of our program. If you need us, please call us on our extensions. This is our email. We'll be in touch. The more I was saying goodbye to these families, the more I started getting emotional and realizing that this wasn't going to be a slight change. That this wasn't going to be something that was going to come and go as easily as I thought. That this wasn't something that I could just sit back and look on my YouTube videos and watch and then be able to be removed from. As the day happened, it became more and more real what COVID meant. Certain employees who had been immune compromised, they had already started taking the rest of the day off. They had already left the building. By 3 p.m. that day, the building was left down to core staff. My weekly schedule goes from Tuesday to Saturday. This was Friday, March 13th. I wasn't even sure if I was going to go into work on Saturday, but I was told that I still could to get any resources I needed and to be able to begin thinking about doing my work from home. But no one had any idea what that meant. So Friday comes and goes. I had a lovely dinner at a friend's house. Haven't had any dinner at anyone else's house since, so I remember that very vividly. Then came Saturday. The next morning, I got to work where we normally have our programs, and we open our buildings from around 8:30, and we keep it open usually till 6. I arrived that day at around 9 or quarter to 9. Everything was already locked up. I had to show my security guard to a security member. Once we got into the space, the directive was clean up, pack up, get out. I was so unprepared for that. So, doing what I could, I took what I needed from my office. I cleared out what I could from the children's space so that the materials and the program equipment we use could be delivered to another floor for storage. I worked on clearing out my office as best as I could on such short notice. And that was a really difficult day because it was a day of grieving for me. No longer were families going to come into the door to be celebrating and joining me in this program anymore. No longer can that program, our children's programs and services and delivery model, be the same way anymore. Things were going to start to change, and I had no idea what that change was. Because of the nature of the pandemic, especially for families with young children and for programs that serve parents, we now have to offer the programs virtually. The first 2 weeks of virtual work, we weren't sure what we had permission to do and not do. So my first 2 weeks at home was going over all the policies and all the important documents that pertain to our work as family support or childhood educators. I got to do a very thorough and research summary analysis of how does learning happen, to learn the pedagogies and principles of ELECT very well, to learn how to manage and run an early on space. This was pre-COVID. So that was what I did in those first 2 weeks. And then in mid-April came the very important decision as our agency had to then become an essential service. At that time, when we had just become an essential service, the children's and family programs, a lot of that was out the window. It was now about who is available to come on site to make meals for the homeless, to get clothes to people who need clothes, and make ourselves an essential service. So I had to decide at that time if it was safe for me to then leave my home in April, to go downtown, to take the subway, ride the streetcar, do what I need to do to go downtown, do my work, and come back and see my family. And it took a lot of conversations, not only with my colleagues, managers, supervisors, and people of that nature, but most and foremost, the conversation happening at home. Is this going to be safe for my roommate? Is this going to be safe for my elderly father that I visit or see time to time? Is this going to be safe for me, for my mental health, for my strength? And at that time, I decided it was not going to be safe for me. So I had made the very hard choice of being laid off for about, 3 to 4 months. And from a person who's had not just one job or 2 jobs always going. I've had usually 3 or 4, from washing dishes in a kitchen to tutoring children to working and teaching. I've always had more than one thing on the go at once. These 4 months when I was laid off, that took a huge toll on my mental health. That took a huge toll in understanding myself. Luckily, being the resourceful person that I am, I did find a company to work with. I did some online sales. I communicated with people. We had meetings and training once a week. We had connective calls. And even though these were calls and training sessions that were specific to the sales part and a private corporation, it was still beneficial for me to have that human contact, to have that banter with people, to meet new clients and meet new people. So for those 4 months, that job really helped me. And it wasn't until mid-July did I have my supervisor give me a heads up and say, we're ready to bring you on now. Early on, our funders from the city have come up with models of how to do virtual programming. So July 22nd, we're going to start, and you're going to start Tuesday to Saturday, and you're going to start your work again, but you're going to be working from home. You're going to need to decide about your vacation days and your banked holidays. You're going to decide about what you need to communicate to colleagues and work members and things like that. So slowly, things started to fall into place again. Immediately, we had to learn what principles and protocols and policies we were following from the city, our funders, to do virtual programming. We had to learn what the definition of virtual programming was, whether it was just telling a story on YouTube or Facebook Live or singing and doing a music circle, or whether that actually included one-on-one time via Skype or Zoom with family members and providing workshops for parents and caregivers, or if it also included providing workshops for staff members and professionals in other agencies. What did programming truly entail? At that time, when we first came back in July, it included some of what I mentioned. And then other things that we did were not included. So then how did we switch up our framework, and how did we balance our hours and our time and our team's responsibilities to meet all that? Keep in mind, by this time in July, we had already been providing our essential service model for about 2 to 3 months. So we know how many people come for meals. We have those numbers of people who come every day. We have those numbers of how many families and children come to look for clothes or ask about support or ask for counseling. We have those numbers now. And so from getting those numbers and starting our work in July, having had a head start with part of our agency serving the community essentially in this way, we are now given the fundamentals to build our services again from the ground up. Virtual programming, what that meant now, means that we release videos for infants and young children with stories and music circles. Videos have ranged from 4 minutes telling one story. There's one 4-minute video on YouTube of me telling the story King and King, which is a fantastic little children's book that talked about a prince who was given directive by his queen mother that at the end of the summer he had to marry somebody. And no matter how many princesses he saw, and no matter how many other members of royalty he interacted with, he never found a princess or a female that made his heart stir, until one day he found a prince that made him very happy. And it kind of talked about the fairy tale of bringing these two princes together to become king and king. And that's one very happy story that I've shared on the YouTube channel for virtual programming. It also varies from 4 minutes in length to a 40-minute video, 40-minute children's yoga video for us. And so that became part of our programming. This was from July. We started implementing the program and really following the number of hours to the T. The important thing was learning not to blame ourselves. We were all dealing with technical issues, learning how to edit and transfer videos. I was an extra on film, but I never studied film. Virtual programming now also means not only are we producing these materials to go on our YouTube page, to go on our Facebook page, to go in our Facebook group. We were producing all these videos, but now we realize families also needed one-on-one support. They were missing that interaction. Usually in a children's program, parents and caregivers are able to come speak to us. If one staff was running this music circle, maybe another parent can talk to the other staff and say, you know, I have an issue with feeding, with solid foods. I have an issue, I need support as a single parent. I have these complications in my life. But as we moved to virtual programming, we were producing, meeting our mandate. We were not connecting with families as much. So then we had to come up with strategies around that. So then we also developed a way where families could email my supervisor, and my supervisor, just like how a case management worker would assign different staff members to different families or different cases, we then got different assignments, and once a week we checked on those families. So once a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2:30, I'm talking to this family here on Tuesdays, and I'm talking to that family on Thursdays for half an hour. What are their needs? Let's check in. How are you? You know, how do you feel? What are you thinking? And these are things that are so important that people don't get asked daily, especially those who are parents trying to run a household, who are looking after children, who are trying to now take care of their school ages, either getting them to and from school safely or getting them on a regular schedule or routine for virtual schooling. There's so much that they're struggling with. Is it internet connections? Is it the sharing of technology devices? Is this a family that only has one laptop? Now they need to share with 5 people to make sure all 5 people get connection to the communities that they belong in to do the work they need to do. What does that look like? How can we help? And so asking these questions, connecting with these families made us realize, well, some families just wanted a music circle for 20 minutes once a week for their youngest one because their older siblings were attending virtual school and they were feeling left out. Oh, nobody should ever feel left out. Boom. So every Thursday, 2:30, let's do a little music circle just for you, just for that little one. Let's make that our little virtual class. Or it was a family who wanted to wean their child from breastfeeding to solid foods. How do we provide that kind of support? Is it with a staff member calling in once a week to do checkups to see how that infant and parent relationship is going? Or is it about that staff member finding now a community collaboration with Food Share, with Birthright, with different organizations that work with different communities who have worked with parents that are weaning their children off from formula or breast milk, chest milk, we call it, because not all individuals have breasts, and not all pregnant people are mothers. So a lot of the work I do and about speaking to people is taking gender out of what we're teaching and preaching and making it more inclusive. So even if that's one thing you take away from our talk today, is that as often as you can and as much as you can as a professional to take gender out of what you're saying and doing and out of the resources you're giving. So instead of having a book for pregnant mothers about being pregnant, we have resources and materials for pregnant peoples about being pregnant and about the journey of pregnancy. Instead of having resources and notes about breastfeeding, we provide safe spaces and brave spaces for chest feeding, and we learn to use that kind of terminology. So going forward, we're not going to be discriminating anyone, hopefully. The one thing I've learned about inclusion is no matter how inclusive you are, there will always be a group or a person that will feel unincluded. And that, at the end of the day, will not change. But it is our desire and our awareness to be inclusive that's going to find that one person, even if they feel that the content or material might not be inclusive to them because of the way we speak and because of our awareness towards inclusion, it will also include them. Then it will provide the safe space or the brave place for that person to come to you and say, you know what, as a Black, Indigenous person of color, this didn't speak to me. Or, as a pregnant, single, trans person, this didn't include me. And how important are those discussions at the end of the day? Because once again, if we are talking about building supports and communities in spaces that don't have much support, having that interaction is what's going to build that support the most. Virtual programming also meant learning how to do workshops, working with Eventbrite, YouTube, and Facebook, and learning about each of the opportunities that are available on the platforms to connect with families. 3 fundamental principles that I've come up with through all my experiences and all my jobs and all my roles working with people and children and families. The first one about inclusion that I did talk about, not in the way that we're used to thinking about it, for example, just of the inclusion of LGBTQ rights and peoples, which is still important, but rather think of inclusion as a way that challenges you to a new idea or new concept, not just in practice, but as a filter or a lens that you start to see things through. For example, meeting a lone parent like a single mother, understanding that some people as such as single parents are single by choice. So instead of treating them and welcoming them into our space as someone who might have real dire or serious need for money or finances or clothing or resources or food, knowing that there are people who become lone parents or single parents by choice, and they have all of that. They have the money to take care of their family and their children. They're just looking for a community to be a part of. They have where they're going to get clothes and shelter and food. They know that those places and things are secure for them. Maybe they're just looking for that relationship or that community partnership. So filtering the way we look. And the way I help myself to do that is, no matter who I'm speaking with or working with, I ask myself this question: would this be fair to me if I were them? And it's a simple thing you can ask yourself about, when you're talking to anyone, in any situation, in any forum, in any discussion. Is this fair to me if I were them? And if you're able to kind of process your thinking through that kind of filter, I assure you, inclusion's not going to be very far from the work you do. You don't even have to focus your attention to thinking about inclusion, because that way of thinking already is inclusive to everything that you're going to put forward and do. Another example was having a child in our program that is non-binary. Non-binary means that in this child's world, they're raised with neither he or she, and that's something for them to decide on a day-to-day basis. That their name isn't going to tell you if they are a boy or girl, and at the end of the day, whether they are a boy or a girl shouldn't be important to you as a service provider. And what does that mean for staff? What does that mean for colleagues who are providing the service? Does that mean having additional training and sensitivity training in regards to this? Does that mean having policies change so that when a non-binary person comes to get your services, on the intake form, they won't be asked to check off if they are male or female? They won't be asked to choose if they are Mr. or Miss or Mrs.? So looking like those areas like that, and if we're able to look through those kind of lenses, we can then make the kind of changes that our community needs to serve those who need it the most. Would this be fair to me if I were them? The second principle is urgency. We must recognize the urgencies and the frameworks which we need to adapt today. Yes, all lives matter. Of course, we're not knocking that down. But today, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter because it was the treatment against a black person that ended up getting a knee to the neck. Black Lives Matter because it was just that individual going to buy, what was it, a bag of Skittles, and they were shot. Going out for a run and they don't feel safe. Black Lives Matter because now we realize in the news, in the media, in the community, this issue matters. And I am not black identified, but that must mean that we must engage in the work of our black friends, our black community members. The second principle is urgency. So recognizing what's important to your community, and although you may not identify with that community group, that you are able to work with that community group and bring members of that community into your platform, into your work, into your space and organization. The last principle of building supports and doing this work is to be impactful and continuous. Impactful and continuous. And that means that actions taken in political movements going forward must be continuous. You don't have your organization or your work attend one workshop by a black person and say, okay, this is Black Lives Matter, and then only have them to come again when it's Black History Month. You don't only talk to queer and indigenous people or only when it's Pride Month, right? You create these conversations, or you create the need for these conversations for everyone to speak, and you do it continuously.